Picture this. It's like 10:30 at night, you're halfway through some streaming binge, and you find yourself just wandering into the kitchen.
Oh, yeah. A very dangerous time.
Right. You open the fridge, maybe you grab a handful of grapes, a slice of cheese, or, I mean, let's be honest, you just polish off whatever was left over from dinner.
Guilty as charged.
And then you finish chewing, brush your teeth, and, I don't know, within 20 minutes, your head hits the pillow. If that sounds familiar to you, you are absolutely not alone.
Not at all. I mean, it's practically the default modern lifestyle at this point.
Yeah. We live in an era where our eating window, basically the time from our first bite of breakfast to that last late night snack, it often spans 14 to 15 hours a day.
Easily.
And we think we're just, giving our bodies a little extra fuel, maybe just settling the stomach before sleep.
Right, you think it helps you sleep.
Exactly. But what if that specific habit is quietly throwing a wrench into your entire cardiovascular system?
Well, it's an incredibly common scenario, like we said, and it really highlights this profound evolutionary mismatch.
Mismatch. How so?
I mean, modern convenience. Having artificial light and refrigerators just a few steps away from our beds, it's basically decoupled our eating habits from our biological clocks.
Because for most of history, we just couldn't do that.
Right. For the vast majority of human history, when the sun went down, we stopped eating. We just didn't have a choice.
You couldn't exactly fire up the microwave.
No, exactly. But now we eat when we're bored, we eat when we're stressed, and we definitely eat right up until bedtime. But our bodies, they simply were not designed to process massive influxes of energy around the clock like that.
So they need a break.
Yes. The internal machinery really requires a dedicated, uninterrupted period of downtime.
And that actually brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are looking at a powerhouse 2026 clinical study, and this was published in the journal Arteriosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology.
Quite a mouthful, but a very prestigious journal.
Yeah, for sure. It's by Grimaldi and colleagues out of Northwestern University. The title is Sleep-Aligned Extended Overnight Fasting Improves Nighttime and Daytime Cardiometabolic Function.
Which is a great summary of exactly what they found.
Right. So our mission today is to understand how simply aligning our fasting window with our sleep cycle without changing what we eat, without eating less and without losing a single pound.
That's the crucial part right there.
Yeah, how doing just that can fundamentally rewire our heart health and our metabolism.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we look at the specifics of what Northwestern actually did, I feel like we need to talk about the current landscape of intermittent fasting.
Or time-restricted eating, TRE, as the researchers call it.
Right, TRE. Because honestly, it feels like everyone and their mother has tried some version of it over the last decade.
Oh, absolutely. Time-restricted eating has undeniably been a massive trend in nutrition science. And, I mean, the core premise is solid. You limit your food intake to a specific window during the day, usually 10 hours or less.
Which sounds simple enough on paper.
Right, and there is a mountain of evidence, starting with some brilliant animal studies out of the Sachin Panda lab, and then moving into human trials showing that giving your body a prolonged break from digestion can improve insulin sensitivity, lower blood pressure, and, help with weight management.
But there's a catch,
The
right?
big one. There has always been this structural flaw in how these studies were designed, and more importantly, how people actually try to apply TRE in the real world.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that real-world application because I've seen friends try to do like a 16.8 fast, but they all seem to do it entirely differently. How are the researchers originally testing this stuff?
So the earlier generation of studies generally fell into two distinct camps, and both of them had major limitations.
Okay, what was the first camp?
The first camp used fixed, highly rigid fasting windows. For example, researchers would have participants practice what's called early time-restricted feeding.
Meaning they eat all their food early in the day?
Exactly. They would eat all their meals early and stop eating completely by, 3:00 p.m.
Whoa. 3:00 p.m.
Yes. And physiologically, the cardiometabolic results were often fantastic.
Well, sure, if you can actually do it.
But from a behavioral standpoint, it is a total disaster. I mean, it's almost impossible for a normal person with a job, a family, and a social life to stick to a schedule where their final meal of the day is at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, if I can never have dinner with my friends again or, sit down with my family in the evening, that diet's going to last exactly 1 week.
Precisely. It's totally socially isolating. So to counter that low adherence, the second camp of studies used self-selected fasting windows.
Oh, so they just let people choose.
Right. They told people just eat within a 10-hour window, You pick the times that work for you.
Which sounds a lot better.
It does, but as you might guess, people naturally shifted their eating windows to fit their social lives. So they would start eating at noon and then finish their last meal at 10:00 p.m. right before they went to sleep.
So they got their 10 hours, but they completely ignored the sleep aspect.
Exactly. They completely ignored when they were sleeping. And sleep is this incredibly active, critical period for cardiometabolic regulation. Ignoring the sleep cycle essentially negates a massive portion of the internal benefits that fasting is supposed to provide in the first place.
Which brings us right to you, the listener. Because if you are someone who wants a sustainable, science-backed lifestyle, tweak something that actually improves your health without feeling like this bizarre punishment where you can't eat after 3 in the afternoon, this is where the Northwestern study steps in.
Right. They wanted to see what happens when you anchor the fasting window directly to your individual sleep schedule.
Focusing specifically on the 2 to 3 hours right before your habitual bedtime. But to understand why that pre-sleep window is so dangerous for digestion, we really have to look at what the human body is actively trying to do as the sun goes down.
It's a huge shift. During sleep, your body undergoes distinct, highly orchestrated shifts in autonomic and metabolic processes.
It's not just like turning off a computer.
Yeah. No, not at all. It's not just powering down. It is a period of intense physiological housekeeping. Your overall metabolic rate drops. Your body's utilization of glucose slows down significantly.
Okay.
And, crucially, your autonomic nervous system completely shifts gears. Throughout the day, your sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight drive, it keeps you alert, responsive, ready to move.
Which we need during the day.
Right. But as you approach sleep, that sympathetic drive is supposed to quiet down, handing the reins over to the parasympathetic nervous system, which we know as our rest and digest state.
Okay, I have to jump in here because I think we often hear rest and digest and assume that means sleep is the perfect time to digest a huge meal. Like, oh, I'm resting and digesting.
Yeah, it's a common misconception.
But digest in the parasympathetic sense is more about baseline maintenance, right? The body's actively trying to power down the heavy machinery, not ramp it up for a huge meal.
That is a crucial distinction. The parasympathetic system facilitates baseline gut motility, just keeping things moving. But processing a massive influx of new calories that requires significant energy, blood flow, and hormonal orchestration that directly opposes the body's sleep architecture.
Wow, okay.
And what's fascinating here is the role of melatonin in this whole power down sequence.
Yeah, let's talk about melatonin. Because
Okay.
most of us just think of melatonin as the sleep hormone, something you buy in a gummy at the pharmacy that makes your eyelids heavy.
Right, but from an evolutionary perspective, it is a powerful system-wide metabolic signal. Melatonin levels begin rising in the brain about 2 to 3 hours before you naturally fall asleep.
Okay.
And emerging evidence shows that eating during periods when melatonin is elevated severely impairs your metabolic function.
Wait, really? How so? Like, what is the actual interaction between melatonin and our metabolism?
It actually comes down to cellular receptors. Your pancreas, which secretes insulin to manage the sugar in your blood, actually has melatonin receptors directly on its beta cells.
No way. The pancreas has melatonin receptors.
It does. And when melatonin binds to those receptors in the evening, it essentially tells the pancreas, stop secreting insulin. We are going to sleep. We don't need to stir any more energy today.
Oh, wow. So if you eat a meal while melatonin is high,
your pancreas is sluggish to respond. It doesn't release enough insulin, which means the glucose from your food just stays trapped in your bloodstream for hours while you sleep, causing microvascular damage.
that is wild. It actually makes me think of a restaurant closing for the night.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, imagine the kitchen staff has already started mopping the floors. They've turned off the fryers. They're putting the chairs up on the tables. That's the melatonin rising in your body, right? Signaling that the day is done. And suddenly, at 10:30 p.m., this huge party walks in and orders a 5-course meal. The staff has to pull the chairs back down, fire up the cold ovens, and scramble to cook the food. It throws the entire system into chaos. It takes way longer to cook the meal because half the equipment is off, and the kitchen is going to be an absolute mess the next morning.
That analogy hits on the exact mechanical problem. I mean, the meal will get processed eventually, but it will be processed highly inefficiently.
Leaving a mess behind.
Yes, leaving metabolic mess behind, like elevated glucose and circulating triglycerides in your blood throughout the entire night.
Yikes.
And this nighttime metabolic disruption, if you compound it over years and decades, it's a primary driver of insulin resistance, weight gain, and cardiovascular disease. Your internal organs just never get a true period of restorative rest.
So I really want the listener to reflect on their own habits for a second here. Think about your evening routine. How often is your biological kitchen staff forced to fire up the ovens at midnight because of a late-night snack?
It's a great question to ask yourself.
Because this Northwestern study set out to see if giving that kitchen staff a strict 3-hour warning, like a hard close to the kitchen before bedtime, could change your entire cardiovascular risk profile.
And the way they designed the experiment to test this was not your standard run-of-the-mill nutrition study.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Because usually with these things, how do they track it?
Well, in the world of nutritional epidemiology, researchers usually rely on food frequency questionnaires. They basically just ask participants to remember what they ate and when they ate it over the last, 6 months.
And I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Exactly. Human memory is notoriously flawed, especially regarding late-night snacking. People forget or they lie. But Grimaldi and his team knew they needed extreme rigor for this.
Right. So who did they recruit?
They recruited 39 participants, ranging in age from 36 to 75, and these were middle-aged and older adults who were overweight or obese, which is highly representative of the demographic that is most at risk for cardiometabolic issues.
And a crucial detail for getting into the study, from what I read, was that you had to have a habitual fasting window of less than 13 hours. Meaning, they purposefully recruited people who normally ate across a long portion of the day and night.
Yes, they wanted to test people who had the exact lifestyle we were just talking about, the midnight snackers.
Right. So how do they break up the groups?
They randomized these participants into 2 groups for a minimum of 6 weeks. It actually ended up averaging about 7.5 weeks.
Okay, a decent chunk of time.
Yeah. And the intervention group, which they called the Extended Overnight Fasting, or EOF group, they had to adhere to 2 very specific rules.
Okay, what were the rules?
First, they extended their normal overnight fast by exactly 3 hours, pushing their total fasting time to somewhere between 13 and 16 hours.
Okay, rule 1 and the second.
Second, and most importantly, they had a strict timing rule. Their last meal must be consumed at least 3 hours before the usual bedtime.
A hard stop.
A hard stop, 3 hours before bed.
And the control group just maintained their habitual 11 to 13-hour fast, right? Continuing to eat whenever they normally would, including right up to bedtime if that was their normal habit.
Exactly.
But what absolutely blew my mind was the methodology for tracking the results here. They didn't just have them use a smartphone app or a diary. They brought every single participant into the clinical research unit at the hospital for an intensive inpatient stay.
Yes. 4 days and 3 nights in the hospital, both before the 7.5-week intervention started and after it finished.
That is intense.
That inpatient monitoring is what elevates this study into a different tier of scientific evidence. When participants are sleeping in the hospital, you aren't relying on guesswork or memory.
So what exactly were they monitoring while they slept?
Well, the researchers installed an indwelling intravenous catheter in the participants' arms. This is essentially a tiny, flexible tube that stays in the vein, and they use a heparin lock to keep the blood from clotting.
Okay, so it just stays in there.
Right, and this allowed the research nurses to draw blood every single hour all through the night while the participants were sound asleep.
Wait, without waking them up?
Without ever poking them with a needle or waking them up.
It's just an incredible visual. Imagine being deep in sleep while a nurse quietly steps into the room and siphons off a tiny vial of your blood every hour for metabolic analysis.
It sounds invasive, but it is the only way to get a high-definition, continuous movie of what is happening metabolically during sleep.
Right.
Usually, studies just take a single fasting blood draw the morning after.
Right, you go to the lab at 8 a.m.
Exactly, but that morning snapshot completely misses all the physiological chaos happening at 2 a.m. or 4:00 a.m.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Did they track anything besides the blood?
Oh, yes. In addition to the hourly blood draws, they used ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. That involves a cuff that automatically inflates and takes readings every 30 minutes for 15.5 hours straight.
Every 30 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, capturing the transition from the late afternoon entirely through the night. And on top of all that, they used polysomnography. They hooked the participants' scalps up to EEG monitors to track their exact sleep architecture.
So they could see exactly when they were in REM sleep or deep sleep, all of that.
Precisely. They measured exactly how much time they spent in REM versus deep, slow-wave sleep.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as I was going through the methodology, I noticed they controlled for a massive confounding variable that almost every other fasting study completely ignores.
Oh, the light.
Yes, the light bulbs in your house.
The ambient light control. This is such a brilliant, crucial piece of the study design.
Hmm.
As we discussed earlier, light hitting the retina is the primary signal that tells the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your brain to suppress melatonin.
Right, it tells your brain it's still daytime.
Exactly. We know that bright, artificial light in the evening disrupts circadian rhythms, suppresses that crucial melatonin rise, and can even elevate sympathetic nervous system activity, keeping your heart rate high.
So if you don't control for that,
Well, if the fasting group in this study was, by chance, exposed to dimmer evening light at home than the control group, it could completely skew all the autonomic and metabolic data.
you wouldn't know if the blood pressure dropped because of the fasting or just because they happened to, read by candlelight instead of sitting under blazing LED kitchen lights.
Exactly. It would ruin the data. So to eliminate that variable, the researchers gave both the fasting group and the control group a strict environmental mandate. For the 3 hours before bedtime, every single night of the study, both groups had to dim the ambient lights in their environment to less than 100 lux.
Okay, for the listener trying to visualize 100 lux,
Yeah.
think of the brightness of a typical, warmly lit living room in the evening with maybe just a couple of table lamps on.
Right, it's not pitch black, but it's very dim.
Yeah, you are absolutely avoiding harsh, bright, overhead LED lights or fluorescent kitchen lights. And by forcing both groups to maintain that exact same low-lux environment, the researchers isolated the variable.
Yes. They proved that any cardiometabolic improvements in the fasting group were driven solely by the timing of the food ingestion, not by a change in their circadian light environment.
Now, hold on. I have to push back a little here. You're telling me they got a bunch of middle-aged adults in the real world to stop eating 3 hours before bed, extend their fast, A&D manage their living room light exposure every single night for nearly 2 months.
That was the protocol, yeah.
I mean, I've tried to get my parents to just eat dinner an hour earlier,
Yeah.
and it lasts maybe 2 days before they're back to their old habits. How on earth did they get compliance for an outpatient study of this length?
It is a totally fair pushback, and dietary adherence in free-living adults is notoriously abysmal. But the compliance data they gathered is actually stunning.
Really? How good was it?
Participants kept rigorous daily logs that were closely monitored and verified by the study staff. For the fasting group, compliance with hitting their specific 13 to 16-hour overnight fasting window was 88%.
88% is really good.
And it gets better. Their compliance for the most important rule, stopping all meals at least 3 hours before bed, was a staggering 95%.
95% compliance over 7.5 weeks.
Yes. And I think it speaks directly to the psychological sustainability of this specific approach.
Because it's not a crazy diet.
Right. They weren't asking people to eat kale instead of pizza, or to meticulously weigh their chicken breast and count every macronutrient, or to endure the social isolation of skipping dinner altogether.
Right, you can still have dinner with your family.
Exactly. They were just asking them to shift the clock, to implement a hard stop. If you go to bed at 10:30 p.m., you just make sure you finish your normal dinner by 7:30 p.m.
That makes sense.
For most people, creating a time boundary is a much more achievable behavioral goal than undergoing a total dietary overhaul.
Okay, so the methodology is ironclad. The participants actually did the work, and they stopped the late-night snacking. What actually happened inside their bodies? Let's look at the primary outcomes from all that continuous monitoring, specifically the blood pressure and heart rate data.
This is where we see the physiological concept of letting the engine idle play out in the data.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, so the researchers analyzed the continuous 30-minute ambulatory blood pressure readings, and they found that the extended overnight fasting group saw a significant reduction in their nighttime diastolic blood pressure, dropping by an average of 1.8 millimeters of mercury compared to the control group.
Seeing that diastolic pressure drop, that crucial resting pressure between heartbeats, that allows the arterial walls to actually repair themselves by almost 2 millimeters of mercury is a massive relief for the vascular system.
It is a significant mechanical reprieve. But even more important than the absolute drop in pressure was the improvement in the pattern of what cardiologists call dipping.
Dipping, explain that for us.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture of cardiovascular health, dipping is a critical physiological phenomenon. In a healthy, robust cardiovascular system, your blood pressure and your heart rate should naturally drop, or dip by at least 10% during the night compared to your daytime ambulatory levels.
Which makes sense because you're lying horizontally, you're unconscious, you're not pumping blood against gravity to your brain in the same way. You simply shouldn't need high systemic pressure.
Exactly. The cardiovascular system desperately needs that downtime. The sheer stress on your endothelial cells, the inner lining of your blood vessels is immense during the day.
Oh, I'm sure.
Nighttime dipping is when nitric oxide production can help repair those vessels. But many people, especially as they get older, or if they are carrying extra weight, or if they have sleep apnea, become what we call non-dippers.
Meaning their blood pressure doesn't drop.
Right. Their blood pressure stays stubbornly high all night long, and epidemiological data is very clear on this. Being a non-dipper puts you at a massively heightened risk for future cardiovascular events, like heart attacks and strokes, as well as severe target organ damage.
Like kidney damage.
The microvasculature in your kidneys and your eyes take an absolute beating when the pressure doesn't drop at night.
So if your heart is an engine, dipping is putting it park and letting it idle at a low RPM to cool off. If you are a non-dipper, you are basically leaving a heavy brick on the gas pedal while parked in the driveway all night.
That's a perfect analogy.
The engine never gets a break.
Yeah.
It is just revving high, hour after hour, burning through parts while you were supposed to be resting.
That is a very accurate way to visualize the mechanical wear and tear on the heart muscle in the arteries. And what this Northwestern study found was that the extended fasting group improved their nighttime diastolic dipping by 3.5%.
Wow.
Furthermore, their nighttime heart rate dipped by 5% more than the control group, resulting in an average reduction of about 2.3 beats per minute across the entire night.
Now, 2.3 beats per minute might not sound like a monumental shift to a casual listener, like, oh, 2 beats, who cares?
It doesn't sound like much until you multiply it across the duration of sleep. Over a 7 or 8 hour sleep period, that is over 1,000 fewer times your heart has to physically contract and pump blood every single night.
1,000 fewer beats a night.
Yes, it is a massive reduction in cumulative cardiac workload.
And the study looked at the non-dippers specifically, right? The people who came into the hospital on day one with that brick on the gas pedal.
Yes, and this is perhaps the most clinically actionable finding. In the fasting group, roughly 60% of the participants who started the study as unhealthy non-dippers converted into healthy dippers by the end of the 7.5 weeks.
60%.
60%. In the control group, only about 25% saw that kind of natural conversion.
Just from giving their digestive system a 3-hour break before bed. Their vascular system fundamentally repaired its natural rhythm.
To contextualize the clinical magnitude of this,
Yeah.
past epidemiological data from vast population studies shows that every 5% increase in blood pressure dipping translates to a 17% reduction in future cardiovascular events.
17% reduction.
And improving your heart rate dipping by the margins seen in this study is linked to a 14% reduction in all-cause mortality risk over the long term.
A 14% reduction in all-cause mortality. That is staggering, is literally adding years to your life simply by clearing the food out of your gut before the melatonin hits.
It's remarkable.
But how does an empty stomach actually communicate with the heart to lower the blood pressure? What is the physical mechanism there?
We can see exactly why this cardiovascular relief is happening when we look at the data on the autonomic nervous system. Remember the tug of war we discussed earlier between the sympathetic fight-or-flight system and the parasympathetic rest and digest system?
Right.
Well, the digestive tract is heavily innervated by the vagus nerve. When you have food in your stomach and intestines, stretch receptors and chemical sensors send signals up the afferent pathways of the vagus nerve directly to the brain.
Basically saying, hey, we're busy down here.
Exactly. And this continuous sensory input prevents the central nervous system from fully dropping its sympathetic tone. The researchers measured this autonomic tug-of-war using continuous heart rate variability, or HRV, specifically looking at spectral analysis.
Now, I know HRV is a super popular metric on smartwatches right now, but how did they analyze it clinically? Like, what were they looking for?
They looked at a metric called the LF-HF ratio. In HRV spectral analysis, you have the low-frequency band, which reflects a mix of both sympathetic and parasympathetic activity, largely driven by baroreceptors regulating blood pressure.
Okay.
Then you have the high-frequency band, which is almost exclusively driven by vagal tone, the parasympathetic relaxing system. So a lower LFHF ratio indicates better sympathovagal balance, meaning the relaxing parasympathetic system is successfully dominating the sympathetic drive during sleep.
Got it. And what happened to that ratio?
The fasting group saw a significant drop in this ratio compared to the control group.
So by not having a gut full of digesting food sending all those signals to the brain, their nervous system was visibly more relaxed. The parasympathetic system could finally take the wheel.
Exactly. The fasting window actively suppressed the sympathetic drive, and the second, incredibly clear piece of evidence for this came from those hourly blood draws while they slept.
Ah, right, the IVs. What did the blood show?
The fasting group showed a 12% drop in their nighttime cortisol levels, an average reduction of 1 microgram per deciliter.
And cortisol being the primary stress hormone produced by the adrenal glands, right?
Right. We are looking at the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When the brain senses physiological stress, like the metabolic burden of digesting a late meal against the circadian clock, it signals the adrenal glands to release cortisol.
And you don't want that at night.
No. Cortisol naturally rises towards the very early morning to help wake you up, but you want it as low as possible in the first half of the night to facilitate deep sleep and cellular repair. A 12% drop is a massive reduction in physiological stress.
That's a huge shift.
It is. Previous experimental studies have shown that even a single night with a cortisol reduction of that magnitude can significantly alter how your cells respond to insulin the very next morning.
Which brings us perfectly to the metabolic side of this study, and what I actually found to be the most fascinating puzzle in the data, the glucose response. Because the researchers didn't just measure fasting blood sugar, they put the participants through a really rigorous stress test.
Yes, the OGTT.
Right, on the third morning in the hospital, they administered a 3-hour oral glucose tolerance test, or OGTT.
For anyone unfamiliar, an OGTT involves drinking a highly concentrated 75-gram glucose beverage on an empty stomach first thing in the morning. Then, the research nurses draw your blood at specific intervals over the next 3 hours.
Basically to see how the body handles a massive sugar bomb.
Exactly. They're looking to see exactly how fast your pancreas releases insulin into the blood and how quickly your muscle and liver cells absorb that sugar out of the bloodstream. It is a dynamic stress test for your entire metabolic machinery.
Now, I'm looking at the results for this, and the study had a co-primary outcome called the Matsuda Index, which, from my understanding, is a mathematical calculation of overall whole-body insulin sensitivity based on that 3-hour test.
That's correct.
But the data shows the Matsuda Index didn't significantly change for the fasting group. If their overall insulin sensitivity didn't budge, didn't the diet basically fail on the metabolic front? Help me square that circle. Was all this fasting for nothing?
It definitely did not fail, but it requires us to look closely at the baseline characteristics of who was actually in the study. Half of the participants in the specific cohort already had normal fasting glucose tolerance when they started the trial.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so when you have a relatively healthy metabolic baseline, meaning you aren't pre-diabetic or fully diabetic, the Matsuda Index, which measures overall whole body sensitivity over 3 hours, isn't always sensitive enough to capture subtle mechanistic improvements.
Right, because there wasn't a massive metabolic deficit to correct in the first place for half the group.
Correct. However, when the researchers zoomed in and looked at the dynamic, minute-by-minute response during the very beginning of the OGTT, a profoundly different picture emerged. The fasting group showed vastly improved acute insulin response.
What does acute response mean at a cellular level? Like, what's actually happening?
It is about the first phase insulin release. When sugar hits your bloodstream, your pancreas shouldn't just slowly leak insulin over hours. It should deploy a rapid, massive spike of prepackaged insulin to immediately halt the rise in blood sugar.
Like a rapid response team.
Yes. And in the fasting group, the researchers saw a significantly higher 30-minute insulinogenic index. This means their pancreatic beta cells, those microscopic factories that manufacture and secrete insulin, became incredibly efficient. When the 75 grams of sugar hit their system, their pancreas rapidly deployed exactly the right amount of insulin in a fast, precise strike.
Let me try a different analogy here. Instead of a battery charging, think of those pancreatic beta cells as workers in a manufacturing plant.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If you eat a huge meal at 10:30 p.m., you are forcing those workers to stay on the assembly line and pull a double shift into the middle of the night. By the time breakfast rolls around the next morning, they're exhausted, they're moving slowly, and they can't handle the morning carbohydrate load. It takes them hours to process the sugar.
Exactly.
But if you close the kitchen 3 hours before bed, those workers get a full restorative night off. They come into work the next morning completely refreshed, and when that glucose drink hits, They aggressively and immediately clear it from the factory floor.
That is a phenomenal way to explain first-phase insulin release, and the data perfectly supports that factory analogy. Because of that rapid, precise insulin release at the 30-minute mark, the fasting group's blood glucose levels at the 60-minute mark were significantly lower than the control group.
Wow, they cleared it that fast.
They cleared the sugar out of their bloodstream much faster, preventing the prolonged post-meal blood sugar spikes that damage the vascular endothelium.
I want to make sure the listener really grasps the magnitude of this, because it is essentially a time travel benefit.
A time travel benefit.
Yeah, by letting their digestive system completely power down at night, by enforcing that 3-hour buffer, lowering their nighttime cortisol, and relaxing their autonomic nervous system, their body became vastly better equipped to handle the food they ate the next day.
That is exactly what the data demonstrates. A quiet, undisturbed night of physiological fasting resets the pancreas, making it highly responsive and efficient. It is a virtuous cycle of metabolic health.
And this leads us to what might be the most paradigm-shifting data points of the entire clinical trial. Because throughout this whole 7.5-week intervention, there was absolutely no change in the total daily calories consumed by the fasting group.
None. They ate the exact same amount of food as they did before the study began.
And correspondingly, there was no change in their BMI, no change in their overall body weight, and no change in their waist circumference compared to the control group.
Zero change in body composition.
This raises an important question, though. If they didn't lose any weight and they didn't cut a single calorie from their diet, how did they get all these profound cardiovascular and metabolic benefits?
Well, it forces us to rethink a core tenet of modern medicine. For decades, the dominant assumption in both nutrition science and clinical cardiology was that the cardiometabolic benefits of fasting or dieting were merely a byproduct of weight loss.
Right. That's what we've all been told.
The logic was deeply ingrained. You restrict your eating window, which forces you to eat fewer calories, which causes you to lose weight. And because you lost adipose tissue, your blood pressure goes down and your insulin response improves. The weight loss was always considered the primary hero of the story.
It's the CICO model, right? Calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
We are so obsessed with it that we assume nothing healthy happens unless the scale goes down.
Exactly. But this Northwestern study elegantly uncouples those two things. It powerfully proved that timing alone is a primary physiological lever, entirely independent of weight loss.
Timing alone.
Yes. Synchronizing your digestion with your circadian biology, specifically the sleep-wake cycle, and that evening melatonin rise, is enough to fundamentally improve your health at a mechanistic level. You don't have to be in a caloric deficit. You don't have to shrink your waistline to see your blood pressure dip, your resting heart rate fall, and your pancreatic beta cells function with incredible efficiency.
That is incredibly liberating news for so many people. I mean, the psychological pressure to constantly lose weight just to be considered healthy is immense.
It's exhausting for patients.
And this research says, hey, keep your calories exactly where they are. Eat the foods you normally eat. Just shift your timeline by a few hours. Give your body a nightly break, and you will still reap massive internal life-extending benefits.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
But I know exactly what a lot of listeners are thinking right now. Doesn't going to bed hungry ruin your sleep?
Ah, yes. The sleep question.
Because if I stop eating at 7 p.m., by 10 p.m., my stomach might be grumbling, and if I don't get a snack, I'll just toss and turn all night.
It's a very common fear, and physiologically it is a valid concern. When you are hungry, your body releases ghrelin, which can stimulate wakefulness.
Right. Your body is like, hey, wake up, go find food.
Exactly. In fact, some of those previous fasting studies we mentioned earlier, the ones that used extreme 3.00 p.m. cutoffs, they actually did show decreased sleep efficiency, likely because hunger hormones were triggering the sympathetic nervous system and keeping people awake.
Nobody wants that.
But remember, this study didn't ask people to stop eating in the mid-afternoon. They asked for a reasonable 3-hour buffer before sleep.
And since they had the polysomnography monitors physically attached to their scalps in the hospital, there's no guessing about how well they slept, right? What did the sleep architecture data actually show?
The polysomnography results were crystal clear. This 3-hour pre-sleep fast caused no negative changes to sleep architecture.
None at all.
None. There were no statistically significant differences in total sleep time, no drop in sleep efficiency, no increase in the number of wakenings after falling asleep, and importantly, no reduction in the percentage of time spent in crucial restorative stages like REM sleep or NREM stage 3, which is our slow wave deep sleep.
So you might feel a tiny psychological craving for a snack out of habit because you're used to eating while watching TV. But physiologically, your brain is sleeping just as deeply, if not more peacefully, because your autonomic nervous system isn't stressed and your heart rate is lower.
Correct. The human body easily adapts to a 3-hour digestive buffer before sleep without triggering stress-induced wakefulness. The hunger you feel at 10 p.m. is often just a learned circadian expectation for food, not a biological emergency.
This speaks so strongly to the accessibility of this intervention. We're talking about middle-aged and older adults, a demographic that often struggles with strict calorie counting or extreme ketogenic diets or punishing workout regimens that damage their joints.
It can be overwhelming.
But simply shifting the clock, deciding that the kitchen is closed 3 hours before you turn out the lights, that is a highly sustainable behavioral modification.
It is a deeply effective non-pharmacological tool. You are practicing a form of chronotherapy. You are working with your body's million-year-old circadian rhythms rather than forcing your metabolism to constantly fight against them.
Okay, let's synthesize this journey for the listener. We have covered a vast amount of clinical and biological ground today. What the Grimaldi study at Northwestern shows us is that by simply extending your overnight fast by 3 hours and enforcing a strict rule that no calories cross your lips in the final 3 hours before you go to bed, you initiate a cascade of profound biological healing.
You allow your autonomic nervous system to actually rest, bringing down the sympathetic fight-or-flight drive and reducing circulating cortisol.
Right.
You allow your heart rate and your diastolic blood pressure to physically dip, giving your vascular endothelium a much-needed break from the mechanical sheer stress of the day.
Letting the engine idle.
Yes. And by avoiding the metabolic conflict with evening melatonin, you reboot your pancreas so that it can handle your morning carbohydrate load with razor-sharp efficiency.
And the absolute best part, you don't have to change what you eat to start seeing these benefits tonight. You don't have to cut your calories, and you don't have to obsess over the number on the scale.
Not at all.
You just need to change when you stop eating. Give your biological kitchen staff the time they need to mop the floors, turn off the ovens, and put the chairs up before the melatonin shuts the lights off.
It is a powerful reminder that in biology, timing isn't just an external factor. Often, timing is the master regulator of everything.
Which leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. If simply shifting our meal timing by 3 hours fundamentally rewires our cardiovascular risk profile and our autonomic nervous system without changing a single calorie we consume, what other passive biological rhythms are we routinely disrupting with our modern, always-on lifestyle?
It's a great question.
If the timing of food is this incredibly powerful, what about the exact timing of our exercise, our social interactions, or our intense cognitive tasks? Could the future of medicine rely less on the pharmacy and more on simply resetting our internal clocks?
It is a fascinating frontier that we are really only just beginning to map out.
So tonight, when 10:00 p.m. rolls around, the ambient lights are low, and you catch yourself eyeing the fridge, remember the idling engine, step away, let the machinery rest, and we will see you on the next deep dive.